Okay, there we go. So today's lesson is plot and pacing, right? So let's start with a question. Have you guys heard of the term architects versus gardeners in writing? Who here heard of it? Never heard of it? Like familiar? Never heard. Okay. So someone else is saying plotters versus planters. Yeah. So plotters versus planters, gardeners, architects, whatever. Alright. But basically it refers to like the two extreme ends of writing styles. One aspect of writing styles anyway. So the architects are usually known as the plotters or the outliners. The how you identify them is that when they write, they will outline a story before writing. See, so gardeners are the opposite. They just write it. Right. Okay. You can think of these as their ballot they have pros and cons to each one. Alright. So let's look at architects first. The pros, story structure requires less revisions. When you write without a plan, you sometimes end up with a story that like, it goes everywhere and then you realize some of it detours and doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up to the plot because no planning was done, right? And throughout, so when you have a plan, right, your story structure has, it might follow the 3 act structure. It might follow something that makes sense, like there's a beginning, there's like a rising action, and then it climaxes and then it ends, right? So there's a peace of mind when you're writing where you know that it's going to go somewhere, and you're less likely to face a writer's block where you say I don't know what to write next because you already have an outline. But one issue with that is that writing ends up boring. So, like, you're just, when you're writing the story, you're just going through the motions, right? You just, from a high level, you know that this is the plot. So when you carry out the scenes, they just make it happen, right? And also another worry is that when you're outlining, sometimes people will take a book or a story, right? They have a story in mind and they'll outline and outline and outline, and it never finishes. They will always forever be outlining, right? And then they say they'll start soon, but if this outline is not perfect, I can't begin, right? Another worry is that once the outline is done, you feel like the story is done, and now the writing is the boring part, right? Because you already have the story plan, right? You already know how it ends, so why continue writing, right? You lose the interest. Uh, so these are kind of like the pros and cons of writing, of being an architect, right? On the opposite end, there are the gardeners, the pensers, the discovery writers. They basically wing it while writing. They take out a blank sheet of paper. They have no clue what the story is gonna be, and then they start writing. So you write one chapter is done. Okay, put it down. The next day, open the book again. All right, write another chapter. Put it down. Okay, pros. The writing is exciting. Why? Because every time you come to the page, right, you ask yourself, what's the most interesting thing that can happen next, right? Like how can the next scene, like what would I like to see in the next part of the story? Whoa, let's do it, right? And so the writing usually feels refreshing. um the sometimes is flexible also where because like let's say you're outlining, right, and then you look at the characters and you feel like the characters should do something else, right, but you already have the outline, and so you force the characters. Have you guys read books or watched shows where it felt like whatever the character did was unnatural? Sometimes it's because there's an outline and they need the character to do that to force it into the story, and it's so unnatural. So when you write with like a more flexible gardening style, you might change, like your story flows better, more flexible, and less preparation needed. So rather than spending days or even weeks trying to prepare an outline, right, you can just, all you need is a blank paper, right? You don't need like, oh no, I need to draw a map of the area and figure out their routes through the world. And then after that, like all these nations, they have like different religions and traits, and then I need to like start planning their interactions and what's the characters and what's their relationship with each other. Oh my goodness, so many, right? So sometimes when you just wing it, you just let it come out, let it, you're letting the story grow, right? That's why you call it gardening, right? The cons, though, you're more likely to face a writer's block. there's also gonna be a lack of a story vision, right? Because you start from the ground, like you're starting with the characters and you just let them exist and then you see where they go, right? If you don't know how the story is supposed to end, right, then it's also very hard to start sometimes, right? Because like the whole when you outline, sometimes it's very satisfying to watch like a protagonist and an antagonist. They have like opposite values, and then in the beginning you see, wow, the protagonist struggles with it, and then by the end of the story you see them like overcoming that struggle, right? But that's kind of not, when you kind of wing it, it's very hard to paint that big picture, right? And so it tends to lack that vision, right? And which means that like when you are in the editing phase of the book, you might need to say, oh, honestly, this part doesn't add to the overall thing. Let's have to cut it out. Let's cut it out. Or there's now a plot hole we need to fix, right? And even then, after fixing everything, the ending might not be as strong. Yeah, so basically it's not like should you choose one or the other, but it's kind of a way to find balance between the two styles, right? For me, I'm a how I like to do it is I architect stuff. I have an outline, but as I go through, if the story feels like it calls for something else, right? As the characters live in in the pages, right? I see that the scene calls for them to do something else, right? Or it's more natural for them to do something else, then maybe I will revisit the outline, change it, and then find ways to work. Kind of like the best of both worlds, right? Um, if the next scene in the outline, I realize it's so boring, I ask myself, how can I make it interesting, right? Maybe keep the content, but change the location. Maybe the characters are supposed, maybe it's some drama where one person finds out that their partner is cheating on them, right? And it's supposed to be just they're watching TV in the living room. And you realize, that's gonna be boring, right? Let's change it up. Maybe it's a high tension scene um, where both of them are working in the office and they are rushing a deadline, and then the partner finds out that the other person is cheating. Whoa, right? You can throw in things to make it interesting, right? Ask yourself, how can we make it more interesting, right? So if you realize you are on the architect side of things, right? Try to find ways to spice it up. So if your worry is you're too architect-ish, right? You can learn how to be a gardener by asking yourself, how can I make it more interesting? By allowing flexibility in your outline, right? If you are more gardening style, you can, instead of trying to do a full outline of the entire thing, which might feel weird, right? Maybe you can plan the main points, the main plot beats, right? There must be a beginning, there must be an end, how the fight is gonna like not fight lah, but like the structure of the conflict eventually goes, right? And then how it ends, right? And once you plan that, everything in between, let it free form the way you are comfortable, right? So it's kind of like finding a balance between that. All right, any questions? Okay, is there any way to weave basically what I explained, right? Like the idea of like balancing out. What you do, you write the main events first, you connect the dots later. Sure, yeah. Structured but free. Yeah, okay, so let's say you're like, okay, so the examples I gave, right? Let's say you know you are outliner, right? And you tend to make it too rigid. Then at any point in time, why don't you ask yourself, how can I make this scene interesting? How can I make the scene interesting? Right? What do I want to see next? And allow that to happen. Right? And if you feel like in a scene, the characters or like the vibes feel like they are leading in a different direction, don't be afraid to detour a little, change the outline a bit if needed, but give yourself that flexibility. You feel like you're a plotter, but you think I was a planter. Yeah, your writing style can change over time. I think it's not is not like something that's immutable. It changes. Usually think of the endings, then what can you make up in the body? Yeah. Okay, so that's another concern with the outlining, right? You have the start, you have the end, then you realize the middle is the boring part. Don't, if you feel like it's gonna be a boring part, make it interesting. If you are looking at the outline where it's only a few lines and you feel it's gonna be a drag, right? When you're actually writing the story, it's gonna be a drag. And when the readers read it, it's also gonna be a drag, right? If you yourself don't find it interesting, then how can you expect your readers to? Yeah. Yeah, more of a mix depending on the story. Definitely. You need to make an actual story. Oh, you will find today's assignment interesting. If the story you're writing is longer, you plot and outline more. If it's a short story, you rely on the existing plot track in your head and go with it. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Do people tend to write the outlines as plotters or keep it in their head? I think either way works. I tend to write it down because I don't work as a full-time author. I have my notes in a document, and so I might write like a few paragraphs a day, take a break for a few days, and then come back to it, and then write the other like write half the story in one go, and then it just goes on the back burner for another 2 weeks. Yeah, it's very, I have a lot of hobbies, so I really bounce between a lot of different things at once. So because I am more likely to forget, I will write it down so I can come back to it. You used to visualize and draw out main key events in a story. When you try to write the motivations for each development, that's the worry. You do want that flexibility, because if you have a very strict outline and you realize the characters would have to go out of character to do something to fit your outline, that's where you compromise the integrity of your characters, right? Does that make sense? Because I sometimes that happens in stories, and it's very jarring, right? You call this out of character when the character basically doesn't act like themselves. Yeah, one shots or continuous situations. A bit of both. Sometimes like it's easy to, so one of the ways, right, let's say you want to write short stories. Short stories are easy to write because, like, they're one off, you don't have to worry about the law, right? But let's say you want to write something longer, but you don't want to go all the way and write a full, like, 50,000 word novel, right? There is a good in between. What you can do is you come up with a world, you do a bit of world building, and then you do one-off stories, right, within that universe, right? And you can explore the same character in different scenarios. You can do like different characters and explore their lives in the different parts of this universe. uh yeah, so you don't really need it to have a plot or like across all the stories. I think that's fine. I think that's a good mix between a full-on novel versus like standalone stories. It's kind of standalone stories that fit into a universe. I think that's a good balance as well. You write the outline with bullet points and you start fleshing out bullet points into paragraphs. Yeah, that works. Yeah. In your mind, there are key plot points, something like major events, but how the story forgets from one point to the next is a mystery until you write it. Yeah, a balance is good. Alright, so if that's all the questions, let's move on. Alright, so let's look at the structure of a story. So let's say you are gonna do outlining, right? You can ask yourself, what's the main premise of the story? How does the story progress? How does the stakes rise? I think the stakes rising is important. Sometimes, like, it just feels like, oh, okay, I guess you're getting closer to the ending, and that's it, right? There's no tension. Tension will be a magic formula to make it feel like you're progressing. Yeah, some books don't do that well, and you end up feeling like, oh, yeah, I guess they're learning new skills, they're doing new things, but I don't feel the sense of urgency. I don't feel the impending deadline, right? Yeah. And then how does it get resolved? Okay, so I'm gonna show you an example with, like, with this, right? So let's say meet Ethan, a young orphan with supernatural powers in a war-torn medieval kingdom with magic. See, so we're doing some world building, right? An evil sorcerer is tearing the kingdom apart with his ideals. So a prophecy foretells that Ethan will defeat the sorcerer and bring peace to the land by retrieving a forgotten artifact. Ethan reluctantly forms a party. He goes out in search of the artifact. He finds a forgotten kingdom where he uncovers the dark secret about his lineage, why his kingdom is his state. So he confronts the sorcerer for the first time, and him and his party barely escapes with their lives. Then we outline some more. We say the party continued their journey. Their friendship is tested and tensions escalate. Right, when they finally reach the artifact, the sorcerer has already gotten to it. So they reconcile their differences and cooperate to fight the sorcerer. So in the chaos, he retrieves the artifact, defeats the sorcerer, peace returns to the kingdom. Okay, so let's say we outline this, right? You know, there's a start, there's a beginning, like there's a beginning and there's the end, and then we say, oh, okay, there is some escalation, right? In fact, he even meets the sorcerer here for the first time, right? If they just went about with their journey and nothing happens, that's kind of boring, right? You're just like, oh, okay, we're going on a journey, the castle's all the way there, okay, we're walking, and then we just like meet some enemies, okay, cool, right? We can, by throwing in the sorcerer here, we kind of make it a bit spicy, right? Like, so it feels like we're getting somewhere. So how does this feel so far? Like, it's a good start. Like it, don't like it? Yes. For me, this is alright. This is fine already. It's an outline, yes. So the actual story will be very obviously when you write the story, it's gonna flesh out. Yeah, this is like a sketch for the story. Yeah, it is. It's the sketch. There is no better one. I didn't say this is like a bad example, and we're gonna show how to improve. This is honestly like what we're gonna work with, so we'll be using that. Yeah, super RPG to a certain extent. I'm following the typical like hero's journey kind of thing. Okay, so now you say we have a book. Let's split it into chapters, right? How would you split it into chapters? Let's take a look at this. All right, how would you split this into chapters? Should each point go into one chapter? How do you want to do it? So introduction is one chapter, finding the prophecy. Then the second chapter is more details on the prophecy. Chapter 3, assemble the party. Okay, sure. So for you guys, every new location change chapter, alright? Or every part of the book change chapter. First 2 or 3 points would be the first chapter. Sure. It depends on how long the book you are writing. Depends on how big each section each section is. 1 and 5 might be one chapter, but maybe several chapters in the middle. So someone saying new chapter every new location or new major event. Okay, I'm gonna teach you a secret, alright? So here's kind of what you guys are proposing, right? Every section gets one chapter. Or maybe if a chapter is too long, you split it into more chapters, correct? Okay, I'm gonna teach you a secret that I have learned through reading a lot of books. Alright. The idea is you do not split it like that. If you wanna split it, you split it in the worst possible place to split. How it will look like is this. Okay? So let's say we introduce the character and this is one chapter. Oh, okay, he lives in this world, right? And then he goes into maybe a fortune teller shop who tells him the prophecy. And then after that, in the middle of the fortune telling, she screams. Right? She sees something in the crystal ball, she screams, the chapter ends. Right? Chapter 2. Like, Ethan gets up from the seat. What's going on? What did you see? Right? The problem is the first point alone has no hook. It's okay, you can figure out the hook. It's not like don't worry, the hook can be in the book, alright? You don't have to have it in the outline. Yeah. So she screams, that's chapter 2. Chapter 2, you start to find out what the prophecy is, right? And then from there, you can take as long as you want, you find the party, right? And then he uncovers the dark secret. Whoa, we split the chapter. Boom! Next chapter, chapter 3. right? Don't, some books, right, they don't let you put the book down, right? Because each chapter keeps ending off at the worst possible location, right? Imagine this, right? Oh, okay, we found your fortune. Oh, so I have to go kill the sorcerer. Yes. Okay. Then Ethan leaves. The end, chapter 2. Right? That's boring, right? So you split it in the worst possible location, right? Uncovers the dark secret. It's like, oh, I know something. Like, or like maybe someone reads the thing. Ethan, like, you are not who you think you are. Boom. Okay. Next chapter. Let's go. Don't let the reader put it down, right? See? So confronts the sorcerer for the first time. In fact, if you want, right, the confrontation with the sorcerer, split it there too. Doesn't matter, right? Their friendship is tested at the climax, right? At the point where they are the most angry, the most heated, and they almost disband the party. End the chapter there. Move on to the next chapter, right? Keep splitting it at bad locations so that the reader feels like the book has so much tension throughout. Does that make sense? Agree, disagree. If you don't agree, that's fine. I but this is how I've been splitting my chapters because this is like pretty good. This is my system. You don't disagree, you need to figure out your own if it works. Okay. Sure, yes. Go and explore. You dig it? Yeah. It's such a Machiavellian strategy. You think it'll work? Sure. You agree that's a good way to do it despite how much you hate cliffhangers. Yeah, it's good for the author. Yes. So that's my recommendation. Okay. Any questions with this so far? It's about finding good places for it. Oh, it's about finding the worst places for it. The nice splitting points are the points that you don't want to split, right? Usually what in books what happens is like it ends if the scene ends, they'll just put a line through it and then begin the next scene. Right? But within a scene, find the cliffhangers, go to the next chapter. Yeah. So honestly, sometimes the best places to stop when you're reading a book is the scene breaks. Those are the actual breaks in the story. The chapter in betweens are really usually the worst place to put a book down. Right. So allow yourself to stop reading in the midst of a chapter, but in between the scenes. Okay, this is book tips on how to read books. Alright, let's go to the next part. Alright, so that's kind of outlining, right? That's the architect side of things. For the gardener side of things, since it's a very feelsy thing, right? Use your outline as a guide. Don't let it stifle the story. If you feel like in the midst of the story you feel like the characters should be doing something else, or you suddenly have like an inspiration and say, wow, this part would be so funny or so epic if it happens next, right? Don't be afraid to tweak the outline, right? Just ask yourself, is it interesting, right? Then, if you're feeling bored, the reader will, while writing, then the reader will be bored while reading it, right? So try to always ask yourself, like, can I make it more interesting, right? Outline aside, how can I make it interesting? What's the most interesting thing that can happen next, right? What do I want to see next? That's also another good way to write and get feedback. Oh, hang on. Yeah, so like one way to do it is when I was writing my book, way back a few years ago, what I did was I after writing a few chapters, I put it in front of my friends and say, yo, this is my chapter so far, right? What do you think will happen next? What do you want to see happen next? Right? What do you feel about each character, right? And it is very interesting because sometimes like certain throwaway characters that I never intend for them to come back, right? People will be like, yo, that character, I bet she's the villain. right? Or they say like, oh, that character seemed interesting. I hope that they will meet up again and then she can show more of her powers because she seemed very mysterious, right? And then suddenly, oh yeah, that's true. Why don't she join the party, right? Why don't she expand the group? And or like when they maybe some other character is like, oh yeah, in the lore there is something. It's like, wow, I can't wait to find out more about the lore. Then I realized, oh, actually I wasn't intending to cover the lore, but I can see how that fits into the story, and oh, that would be so cool actually. And then I will change the story to fit. So I think like, if you wanna, our world is very dynamic, right? Everyone, the environments shift, people shift, they change, they interact with each other, like it's a living thing, right? It's a system of so many intricate moving parts, and if you want your book to kind of have the same life to it, you need to embrace it, right? Don't fight and put a structure, right? Like the universe has no structure. Okay, it does, but you know what I mean. Okay, so come out, allow yourself to break the outline, allow yourself to change and tweak. If you can't see it with fresh eyes yourself, it's always good to put it in front of people and let them see it for you, right? If halfway through they say, oh yeah, honestly it wasn't that interesting, I got bored, right? That's not a bad thing, right? That just says that's feedback too, right? The fact that they didn't read it is feedback that you need to make it more interesting, right? You don't say, oh, it's you haven't read it yet, okay, I'll wait a few more weeks. No, you take it, you make it more interesting, you put it in front of them and make it interesting enough for them to read it, right? I think user feedback, like a reader's feedback will illuminate more, right? Which is why a writing group is helpful, because you can help each other, you can get fresh eyes on it. Different people have different opinions. Not all feedback have to be taken, like it doesn't mean a revision, right? Because sometimes I have stories where character is the protagonist is intentionally annoying, right? And they're like, oh, this character is so annoying, I don't like him, right? You should make him more interesting, or make him nicer, right? And I know that if anything, I know that I did something right, because the character, I in the story, I know that he's gonna mature throughout the story, and by the end he will be a kind and understanding person, which is why if you hate him now, right, that's correct, that's how I want you to feel. I want you to hate him now so you can love him when he matures, right? But not everyone will get that, right? So it's okay, not all the feedback needs to be taken into like that needs to affect your story. It really ties into the vision for what you want this to be. Yeah. Any questions? Okay, let's see. A lot of time when I outline, I actually end up changing what happens by the time I'm done writing the outline, and to go back to write the beginning to make it work. Yeah, that's fair. That's the process of editing. I don't um even like the best authors in the market, they don't write the story and it's done and they put it into a book. They don't. Like they write, it goes back to the editors will check for them. In fact, the bigger the writer, the the more cycles of editing they go through, right? In fact, if you Google like the kind of editors they are the kind of editors that help you fix the plot, right? They're the kind of editors that look at um like sensitivities, right? Like let's say if you're talking about certain religions or certain races or certain like beliefs, right? One of or like certain, let's say LGBT group, right? They will actually try to put it in front of the groups that they're trying to represent and make sure that they feel this represents them correctly or faithfully, right? You don't want to end up with caricatures where like the Chinese guy always goes, oh yeah, I am going to eat my noodles. Like, bro, I eat other stuff as well, and don't say rice because screw you, right? Like it's so that's another form of editing, right? Or like at least reviewing, right? And then there's like the people who look at pacing, right? After like the structure of the story, the pacing, You look at the paragraph, you look at like, and then you go down to grammar editing, and grammar editing, like the lowest level, that's where we use stuff like Grammarly. But it doesn't hurt to have a human eye go through it as well. So there's so many levels of editing. I'm barely scratching the surface. um yeah, and it's good to understand that your story, when you are writing it, you are not writing it in its final form. You are writing it as something that will change and improve, and you are polishing it as you go, right? If you write and whatever you've written just immediately makes it to your social media, I mean, that's not the bad thing, right? Not everyone wants to go through the whole process of editing, right? But if you want to make your story good, that is part of the process, right? You need to polish your product. Yeah, they did it in the Spider-Verse. Yeah, I think it's good to, like, especially if you're representing a culture that is not yours, or a race that is not yours, a belief system that is not yours, right? Don't It's very easy to just like rely on stereotypes and caricatures, right? But if you want to do it properly, this is where, understanding. Okay. All right, moving on. Okay, so let's take a look. Just gonna bring up something about the villain. I usually good villains will contrast like the protagonist's values. And they will challenge the protagonist. I think those are interesting. And in fact, if anything, like I think we brought up, say, Iron Man, right? Like Iron Man, and like in the first movie, him and Tony Stark and the antagonist, I forgot his name, like they are both arms dealer. So it looks like they share the same values, but no, right? They have different values. One believes that it doesn't matter what, if we sell the weapon, the antagonist believes that if we sell the weapons, it doesn't matter who buys it, right? We just pay to the highest bidder because that's profit, right? Tony believes that, we need to sell it to the right people because we need to know, this is an ethical thing, right? And so that becomes that struggle with back and forth, right? And usually this kind of thing, like they will try to write it into the ending as part of the final confrontation, where their difference in morals will bring will allow the protagonist to win, right? Another example, I mean, Pokemon is also another example where like, oh wow, you see your Pokemon as tools and weapons, but we see our Pokemon as friends. That's why I won, right? Like that's the whole idea. Where there's like a clash in values, but that clash in values is what allows them to grow, right? What other stories you can think of? Stories, movies, books, whatever, right? What can you think of that fits this idea? Everything, everywhere, all at once. Okay, I've never watched that. I have been meaning to, but I have not found the time. Okay, I'm not sure if anime counts. Cooking Master Boy fits that framework. Nihilism versus ultimate. I'm talking about movies. Like you can't just take two concepts. Oh, are you saying those concepts are from Everything Everywhere All at Once? Okay, got it. Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Okay, yeah. I mean, Harry Potter's another one, right? The whole idea of like there were like Harry Potter and Voldemort, like they both have powerful, like they're both linked by prophecy, but Voldemort doesn't believe in like love. He believes in like soul, like doing it himself, being the master of his own fate, right? But by trying to be the master of his own fate, right, he brought about his own demise. Whereas like Harry Potter, like he's alive because of his mother's love, and now he wins because of his friendship, and I don't know, right? It's about concepts that come into play, right? Black Panther, okay. Ender's Game, and especially at the end, yeah. Harry Potter was discriminatory to the Slytherins. Yeah, but at least it's not like a race thing, I guess. It's not a race slash culture. It's just oops, you got sorted into the bad guys group. But it's fine. Like yeah. So this thing is interesting. Cause sometimes you don't want to be writing an antagonist where like it just feels like they're just some random character and you're just like, okay, yeah, sure, I'm gonna defeat him, right? So like struggling with that is fine. Sometimes it doesn't even have to be a person, right? Um, it 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 could be a government that you're fighting against. It could be a concept you're fighting against, right? Like certain what are the examples where a character is fighting a concept, right? Some of the self-development stories, right? Maybe the real villain is their own personal fears holding them back, right? Like the true fight is their own beliefs. Do you guys remember? Let me think of one. What comes to mind of Devil Wears Prada? Who here has watched it? Super old movie, I think. Right? Like there's no villain in that sense. Like you think the villain is that lady, but really like she's fighting her own beliefs in that sense. Yeah. The Good Place? Okay. The villain there is the system? Yeah, okay. Fight Club in a way? Fight Club. To a certain extent, yeah. Psychological horror, psychological thrillers are a whole different ballgame. Oh my goodness, those are amazing. I love this kind of things also. Unreliable narrators. Yeah. But yeah, if you're going with a villain, multi-dimensional, with morals and backstories, those can help. I think superhero like shows tend to the older ones tend to overdo it. It's just like wha ha ha, I just want to destroy the world. Um it's not the most interesting, but then again sometimes you don't need it to be interesting, right? Maybe sometimes it's just a matter of like, hey, I just wanna see the good guys win, right? I don't wanna feel bad when the guy like ends up falling into like a bucket of molten lava, you know. I don't care. I don't want to feel bad, right? So let's just paint him as the most evil guy in the world and let's be done. Right, so there's kind of a pros and cons to it also, right? Sometimes you don't want people to feel conflicted over the ending. It's just like, okay, I'm happy the good guys won, but I don't know how I feel about the how they killed the villain. I feel bad, right? I mean, it's just balance it out, right? Yeah, but I think the main point is also like the villain comes in to create tension, and you should feel throughout the story, right? Um, throughout the story try to bring in the tension every now and then, remind the protagonist and in turn remind the reader why they are fighting, right? Just keep bringing it back, keep grinding the protagonist and the antagonist together, like grind, like just have that conflict, have it build up. Yeah, you don't like villains who are facially disfigured or are disabled. It feels ableist. Ah, uh, yeah, messy. Okay, any questions with this so far before we move on? I think we have two more concepts to go. We'll ask at the end of this lecture. Sure. Okay, so let's look at stuff. All right, beyond the there's a three X structure. Two X structure. Oh my god. Yeah. So that I think I did introduce the two X structure early on as like a form of like it's a simple way to get into the storytelling. Um, but there are other ways to write your story, right? Beyond that. So yeah, so again, reminder what it is, but you can change it, right? There is the hero's journey, which is kind of you can kind of see how it might be linked to the three X structure, right? But it's more specific. There are more plot beats that you have to follow in that sense, right? So first, it's a call to adventure, right? Then you get supernatural aid. There's threshold guardians. So like, and then threshold. This is where once they cross the threshold, they are at the point of no return, right? So they're in the unknown world, right? And then they get the helper first. The helper will be usually the sidekick. Um, the mentor figure will appear, and the mentor will help them. Then they go through challenges and temptations. I can't remember what these extra beats are, but basically there's a whole idea to it. It needs to follow a certain it needs to follow a certain thing, right? Transformation atonement, and then you return. So I think you guys kind of seen, like, are there any stories that come to mind that follow this? This one I think is very reminiscent of fantasy stories, so I don't read a lot of those. But the mentor figure does. Let me Google that actually. Heroes journey examples in movies. Odysseus. Hobbit, Lord of the Rings. Okay. Yeah. Hunger Games, really? Oh, that's true. Hunger Games, like the helper would be uh what's his name? Peeta, and then the mentor is Haymitch, right? They introduce Peeta first earlier on, then the mentor appears Haymitch, right? And then I guess like where she her death and rebirth would be her lowest point where she's almost going to die, right? And then she starts to, oh shit, like Peeta will help me, right? And then that's kind of her atonement, right? From always like Peeta is gonna be a burden to Peeta is gonna help me out of here, right? And then that's how she goes back, right? Harry Potter, right? The helpers would be the two friends, like Hermione and Ron, but then the mentor is usually Dumbledore, where he steps in at different points to say, hmm, maybe you need why don't you go in the mirror to go and find out what you need, right? Yeah, so it's quite interesting to see this come up. Yeah. Shrek. Shrek as a helper, which is Donkey. Who exactly is the mentor in Shrek though? I don't think that one I don't know. But there's basically a structure to this. Uh, can I can I introduce a subversive example of a mentor? J.K. Simmons' character in Whiplash film. Okay, that one I have not watched either. I heard good things about the film though. Lord Farquaad is the mentor. No, most obviously not. Okay. So there's also another one, Pretext Pyramid, which is very similar to like, bless you, correct. Very similar to like the 3x structure. Parallel plot structure. So Lord of the Rings has a lot of parallel plots where you actually jump between the different characters and see what each of them get up to, right? Each of them has like different like connections, and so you jump between them. So that's another way to structure your story. You have looping plots. So this is both okay, this is from the left side is from Triangle. It's those paradox kind of loop where it's a time loop, right? But at first you think the time loop is just a loop, but you start to realize each loop is different, right? And then you start to ask why, or like can she break out of the loop? And then like something, and then eventually you find out something interesting about this loop that you start to realize something has gone really, really, really wrong. Like a Groundhog Day, no, this is a horror, like psychological horror kind of thing. Uh, I recommend watching this. I quite enjoyed watching Triangle. Uh, this movie was Predestination, I think. Is it Predestination? Predestination film. Yeah, it is. Very interesting. I didn't quite like it, but it's also another example of like a looping story. Non-chronological order. Have you guys watched Memento? Memento is great. Oh my goodness. Is it 2009 film? I don't remember. I don't know which year. Finding Dory. I have not watched Finding Dory. Triangle. Let me Google that Triangle movie. Yeah, 2009. Correct. Okay, so Memento is great. How it works is it jumps between the past and the present, and basically it's very it like this. Imagine like the timeline goes from forward to the end, right? You are actually watching like what came in the end first. So imagine like if the story is one, part two, part three, part four, part five, part six, part seven, part eight, right? You watch part eight first, then part seven, then part six, then five, four, three, two, one. Right? And you'll be like, but you know the ending. That's not interesting anymore. Right? You are wrong. Right? Watching it backwards is what makes it interesting. The entire story is tied into the backward storytelling. So there's another example of it. If you guys have played the game To the Moon. To the Moon is also another heartbreaking one. Oh, I cried. It was so good. It also is a form of like backwards storytelling. Um, yeah. So I think it's right. So imagine this, right? You see a character just like maybe you see the ending, right? I show you the ending. One character, like person A pushes person B off the cliff, and woo, then they die. Okay, cool, right? That's part like the first part of the movie, and then you jump back maybe a few years before, and you show them how they became and how the fighting has came about, which you now understand why one person pushed the other off the cliff, right? And then you jump back, and then the more you jump back, you start to see, oh shit, they used to be friends. And then you jump back some more and you see them as 15-year-old kids and they're writing in notebooks like, we'll be friends forever. Right? And then you start to realize, oh no, you guys don't know what I know. I know how this ends. I don't want you don't be friends. Stop. Break this up now. Right? You feel for the character. Some of these moving backwards things can make for very powerful because the whole tension, right, is not in how it ends, but you just see how they came to be. And sometimes you're just like, no, I don't want to see you guys go down this path, right? But now you are helpless to stop it as you watch what events led up to it, right? And oh my goodness, go watch Memento, go play To the Moon. Those are very good for backward storytelling. Okay, other plot elements. Subplots are examples of that. Um, Subplot tends to be like you imagine like there's an overall goal, but in between, right? I mean Avatar: Legend of Aang, right? Eventually you need to defeat the Fire Nation, right? But in the meantime, you go to this town, you figure out something in this town. You go to another place, you try to solve a problem, right? You go somewhere and there's a spirit that you need to put to rest. Like, these are kind of subplots, right? And you might have overarching subplots where all these little quests are meant to help the Earth Nation, right? Or all this little quest is to help someone find love, right? You could have plot twists, red herrings. Red herrings is where you think someone's gonna be the villain, or you think something is gonna be the solution, and then it turns out it's not. You can break the fourth wall, unreliable narrator. These are just tip of the icebergs, right? Just need to figure that out. All right. Any questions so far? Let's move into one last section after this, and then we can call it a night. But any questions for this? A lot of these, please do your own research. Like I won't be able to teach everything in this lecture. Okay, I think no questions. Okay, very good. Okay, so components of a story. I like to think of it as three different parts, right? There's the plot, there's the world building, and then there's the characters. But these things interact. And I think I said before in the world building lecture how the space affects the people, right? And how the people affects the space, right? Now you pull in plot. The plot also affects, like how you need the plot to go, right? It affects the characters, but it affects the world as well, right? If this if the story is about a dystopian world where the government is unfeeling and everyone's lives is calculated in numbers, right? And how successful you are determines how long the government will let you live, right? Then you see then the plot would have to tie into that, right? The plot would have to tie into people fighting for their right to live longer, right? How can success be a measure of a person's worth, right? And then that's how all these things tie in together, right? Because the world building and the plot is intricately intertwined, right? And the characters are intertwined with the plot and the world building. So you have to see these three elements working together, right? So let's take, for example, Harry Potter, right? Let's try to understand, right? So the world building, like, it's a very strong world build, right? In the sense that, oh, there's magic, right? And I think, okay, you guys gonna fight me for this, right? Oh, like, oh, Harry Potter actually, right? Like, okay, look, okay, it's a world build that has sparked, right, millions of imaginations. All right, so I'm gonna leave it as that and say that's a very strong enough world build, right? How does it shape the characters, right? It shapes the characters because the characters are like, they live with magic, right? You just come into a world, oh, yeah, sure, we just let magical lanterns float in the air. Our newspapers normally like have animated pictures. Sure, this is the norm, right? And then you have this whole idea of like splitting between the muggles and the wizards, right? How does it tie in with the plot, right? The whole idea of a prophecy, the chosen one, Lord Voldemort, stuff like that. All these are magical elements tied into the world building, right? But it's also tied to the characters, right? Because the plot involves the characters, right? And all these intertwine in different ways. Make sense? Here's another example. When I first gave this gave this panel, it was back in 2021, I think. I don't know. Yeah, maybe 2021. But basically, this was when Squid Game was relevant. So let's try this out, right? What's the world build, and what's the plot, and what's the character? So we know the characters, right? What's the plot? Poor dude needs tons of money fast. Okay. Then what? Basically a death game. Last man standing wins all the cash, right? Then the rest die. Okay. So someone dupes him into playing the game. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, so basically man needs money. In desperation, he plays this game where people basically live or die, right? Until eventually the sole survivor makes off with the money. Like, it's basically a game. It's Fall Guys, but Fall Guys, but money and life. Survival of the fittest or cash. Okay, yes. So how does this tie into the world building? Because isn't this just like, the world building feels like, oh, okay, modern Korea, right? But that's not quite it. The world building is basically the idea, right, that rich people have gotten so dissatisfied with life that they are perfectly fine with watching poor people compete among themselves for money, right? All for entertainment of the rich. See, that's the world building. The world building is where people are so messed up, where capitalism and money and the poverty divide, right, ties in, like, and creates this game for poor people as a cruel, cruel joke, right? There was a discussion at the end of the show as well. Yes. yeah, so that's kind of the world building, right? And you can see how this world building ties into the characters where they are struggling to fight that poverty, right? Where they have they have families to feed. You know, someone has like a terminal disease and they need the money for hospital bills, right? And then that's where the plot ties in, right? The plot is about fighting that system or at least trying to just barely scrape it out, right? So that's kind of where you can tie stuff in. Makes sense. Okay. So we're gonna do something very interesting for this last part. Okay. So let's pick uh one of these plots. Let's take one of these plots and then we are going to split it into the different parts ourselves. Alright. So the first prompt is futuristic way of general, people spend most of their times living in virtual realities. However, a serial killer is murdering people in virtual worlds, leading them to die in real life. Protagonist needs to discover the culprit before it's too late. Okay. Second one, medieval war of Halvor, an unlikely duo have to defeat a corruption that is spreading over the continent. Okay. The other one, a college student finds out that his two high school friends are dating each other. The issue, one of them has a dark secret that the other person is unaware of. So let's vote on a prompt. I am going to use reactions to indicate, how do I put prompt 1, 2, and 3. Are there the can someone find the reactions for like typical numbers? Don't know where the damn numbers are. There's ABCs. I don't see the numbers. Oh, there we go. 1, 2, 3. All right, you guys got it. Okay, let's go. I'll give you a few more seconds to vote, and then we'll pick one. Okay, there's a tiebreaker. Oh no, everyone's voted. Okay, no, never mind. We have number one with 6 votes. The rest have 3 and 1 respectively. Okay, the last time I did this in my panel, like at the FurCon, number 2 was like the popular one. Alright. So let's take that out. Okay, I'm gonna copy paste that in the chat, prompt number 1. And then we can work with it. Okay, in the futuristic world, blah blah blah. Alright. So what's the world build, right? Futuristic world where people live in virtual realities. Okay, now we need characters, right? Who will our character be? Let's say main character is, I don't know, what's a good name? Dylan. Alright, Dylan. Main character Dylan. Do we want to give him a sidekick? Right? Come. Sidekick, yes, no. Solo protagonist. I'll fill out the plot in the meantime. Serial killer is murdering people in virtual worlds. Okay, sidekick sounds a little degrading. Sure, who do you want him to be? World building is that there's a way to kill. Okay, so however, people dying in the reality in the virtual world leads to death in real life, right? And why is it dangerous, right? Maybe the virtual world has safeguards. The virtual world has safeguards to prevent people from dying. It makes sense, right? Like, you know, like you go to VR chat and they're just like, oh yeah, you want to fall off the edge of the world? No, we don't let you. However, the killer seems to be able to circumvent these safeguards, right? Okay. So now we have, do you want an accompaniment, right? We could have someone else follow them, right? Okay. Friend, friend could be someone else. I don't know. Let's call them influencer character. Okay, so Dylan. Let's put here a man in his late 20s. Then friend is influencer. Sure, let's do it. So maybe he's a high school friend. Okay, wait. Accompany. Okay, he is accompanied by name. Detective. We can do detective. Sure, whatever. Right? It's up to you. He's accompanied by a friend from high school. Okay, we need a name. We need a name. Name for this person. Come throw a name. Male, female, it's fine. We'll take whatever. Friend from high school, fools, and I saw someone say influencer in the virtual world. See? Okay. If no one has a name, the friend is not gonna be X. Okay. So Dylan Jones, sure, Jones, whatever. Dylan, first hand sees someone die in front him when a car crashes into. Okay, see, first hand witnesses. Okay, Dylan witnesses a car crash first hand in the virtual world, which should be impossible given the safeguards. Someone dies and they cannot, and it is revealed they die in real life, right? More brain dead rather than cardiac arrest possible, yes. Okay, so maybe they investigate more, then encountering the, like, realizing that there is a mysterious person behind these murders. Okay, but then as they investigate, uh the mysterious person tries to kill them off too. So you see, now the tensions are escalating, right? As they get closer and closer to the truth, right? As they get closer and closer to the truth, the tensions rise because the murderer is trying to get back at them, right? And then maybe we do uh the when they finally confront the person, like, oh yeah, no, maybe they eventually find out that the murderer isn't a human but a digital entity that exists in the system, right? In the virtual world. When they finally confront the murderer, okay, it's reveal. This is just Democrat. I have never played it or watched it or whatever this is. I'm sorry if we saw that. It's revealed that it's Dylan's consciousness uploaded in the system. Okay, so they blah blah blah. They fight, and the fight is made more complicated because by the fact that one, the entity knows Dylan's moves, and 2, the entity is digital. So, but Dylan wins. It's so small. Dylan eventually wins, and peace comes back to, and the situation is resolved. But then we can do cliffhanger. It's revealed the entity didn't actually die. Okay, yeah, the end. Woo! See? So tada, this is how I would do like an idea of like the world building, right? In fact, you can come up with more world buildings, right? Maybe in the virtual world, right? In the virtual world, people live in luxury, right? So this is why do they live in luxury? Because in the virtual world, scarcity isn't real, right? If you want the biggest house in the world, you build the biggest house in the world, right? If you like to live minimal, you live in a minimal house, right? If you like a traditional ancient castle kind of vibe, that is your house. In fact, maybe people have multiple houses because why? It's free, right? You change house every other day. Why not, right? See, this is the kind of world people live in, right? They get to customize their aesthetic, right? Maybe because you can change how you look, right? You can change your avatar, right? Everyone may look different every day. So how do you recognize them, right? Maybe you recognize them by their handle, or you recognize them by their IDs, or you recognize them by a contact list in your mind, right? So I guess people live in luxury due to the lack of scarcity, right? And then maybe, you know, characters instead of policemen, right? There could be moderators instead of policemen. Yeah, moderators, right? People, which is for scarcity. Sheesh, I am terrible. Yeah, people are entitled and they don't want to move back to the real world, right? So these are different tensions that you can come that that creates that push and pull, right? Make sense? Agree, disagree? How does this feel for a good pass? Right? It's a lot. Really? Okay, you like it? Okay, that's cool. Yeah, and we managed to do that in how long? 5, 10 minutes, right? We have something that we can work for a full story. Feels like can be a good 10 novel. We can start with one, right? So the idea is when you have a prompt, right? You just need a prompt, and then you come up with these things where the world build, the characters, the plot, they tie into each other, right? The way people act, right? Like they have to fight each other, right? So maybe because people are entitled, right? Tie that into the plot, right? Maybe the murderer doesn't like how people are entitled, right? Or maybe they don't, and maybe that dislike of that entitlement stems from Dylan's own dislike of the virtual world, right? Maybe he doesn't like the virtual world, right? But he's just like, ugh, my colleagues are in the virtual world, so I have to be in the virtual world, right? But I prefer to be in real life, right? And now his entity in the system fights him back on that, right? And then you can tie these concepts, this push and pull, these tensions can only happen because we're talking about a world that supports this kind of virtual reality, right? Such an immersive virtual reality, right? And so these things tie together. Makes sense. Agree, disagree. Do you feel how the three factors tie together? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So hopefully this gives you guys like pretty good inspiration, right? Where you can come up with something in like a matter of minutes, right? This feels like a solid foundation for a book, honestly, right? So you can take this template if you want. If you want to come up with your own template, honestly, this is just 3 words and 3 boxes. All right, come up with your own template, whatever. Right, go for it. Okay. So let's move on to the take home exercise. Right. this will be your final assignment for the workshop. All right. I'll give you guys the next 2 weeks to do it, right? We have one more lecture which will kind of be just an exploratory and we'll talk about stuff. And then we'll end off the on the 12th lesson, kind of like free and easy. All right. So this is like our last like teaching you structured writing. So now that you guys have learned everything over the past 10 lessons, put it together, write a story. Okay. Aim for at least 1,000 words so you don't just hack together like, oh yeah, here's 100 words, have fun. Right? Try to use something long enough for you to put into practice everything you have learned. Right? But you don't have to write a whole novel if you're not comfortable with that. Or if you want to start writing a novel, go for it, right? You could just submit chapter 1 for your assignment, but then you could write chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4 until you have a whole book, right? But I think you guys have a good enough handle on things. All these lessons hopefully build up for you to write out and hopefully achieve the vision you are going for. So this is your last homework, right? Okay, any questions? Okay, no questions? Anyone else? Yeah, you're asked as you're working on the assignment. Go for it, right? I don't want to put restrictions on this assignment. Should you be worried about specific details? What do you mean by specific details? Like I think just write what you want. Remember the very first assignment where I told you guys to write whatever? The goal also was to allow you guys to write something, and that will be a checkpoint, right? And so as you write this final assignment, right, you can go and compare your writing style before the workshop, and then you compare it to the writing style after the workshop. Make sense? I remember someone was complaining, oh yeah, the first assignment was all over the place. I don't understand why I'm just told to write something. The second assignment was easier because there was structure, right? I think the point is also to let you explore, right? And it becomes a way to kind of capture what you were, like, how you were writing. And then now that we have something to compare to, we can see, kind of see what you have learned, right? And see how it shapes your writing also. I do like to go back in the to see what I have written before, and I'm just like, I have improved. And I'm thankful for improving, but oh man, my old stories are terrible. Um, yeah. All right. I'll leave you guys with this. If you guys have any questions with the assignment, right, feel free to ask. But I hope that this is something that you feel excited for, right? Like you can find writing prompts online. You can just or maybe you have always been thinking of writing a book, or you have a story that's been stuck in your mind that you have never gotten around to writing. Like I think take this opportunity to explore it, right? This assignment is purposely left free flow for that purpose. Yeah, with that, I hope you enjoy your last assignment, and this is our 10th lesson. All right. Okay, so good night, rest well, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye.